The storm hit harder than anyone expected that night. Rain pounded the thick forest outside Portland like bullets from the sky. Lightning split the darkness every few seconds, followed by thunder that shook the ground. Most people stayed inside, warm and safe in their homes. But something was about to happen that would change everything. High above the clouds, a small metal pod tumbled through space. Inside, Zara gripped the sides of her seat as warning lights flashed red all around her. Her ship was breaking apart. The navigation system had failed hours ago, and now the life support was going crazy. She could barely breathe as her damaged vessel spun out of control toward the blue planet below. Zara looked nothing like the humans she was about to meet. Her skin had a soft blue glow, almost like moonlight through water. Her arms and legs were longer than a human's, but they were weak too. Back on her home planet, she needed special equipment just to walk around. The genetic condition she was born with made her muscles work differently, and right now, that equipment was sparking and smoking from the crash damage. The pod hit the forest floor with a sound like thunder. Trees snapped like twigs. Metal screamed against rock. When everything finally stopped moving, Zara lay still, for a long moment. She was alive, but barely. Her mobility device was completely destroyed. Strange blue lights pulsed under her skin, getting dimmer by the minute. These lights always showed how she felt, and right now they were fading fast. She managed to crawl out of the wreckage just as human voices echoed through the trees. 2 forest rangers had seen the crash from their watchtower. They came running with flashlights and emergency gear, expecting to find a small airplane or maybe a weather balloon. They definitely weren't expecting to find her. "What in the world?" the first ranger whispered, stopping dead in his tracks. His flashlight beam caught Zara's blue skin and strange, long limbs. She tried to lift her hand in what she hoped was a peaceful gesture, but the ranger stepped back in fear. Is that even human?" the second ranger stammered. He fumbled for his radio with shaking hands. "Base, we need backup out here. We need a lot of backup." Zara tried to speak, but the sounds that came out weren't English. Her people had their own language, musical and soft. To the rangers, it just sounded alien and scary. She pointed to her broken mobility device. Then, to herself, trying to show them she was hurt and needed help. But fear makes people see threats everywhere, even when there aren't any. Within an hour, the forest was full of vehicles. Police cars, military trucks, and black SUVs surrounded the crash site. Bright lights turned night into day. People in hazmat. Suits poked at her broken ship while others pointed guns in her direction. Zara had never seen weapons before. Her people had given up violence long ago. But she understood the message clearly enough. A woman in a white coat knelt down beside her. This human seemed different from the others. Her eyes were kind instead of afraid. She checked Zara's pulse and looked at her injuries like a real doctor would. When she saw how Zara's legs wouldn't work properly, recognition flashed across her face. "She's disabled," the doctor said to the soldiers around them. "Look at her muscle structure. She can barely move without assistance. She's not dangerous." But the man in charge wasn't listening. He saw only an alien creature that could be a threat to national security. "Bag it and tag it," he ordered. "Take her to the facility. The scientists can figure out what she is and where she came from." They loaded Zara onto a stretcher, but not gently. Every bump sent pain through her weakened body. She watched the forest disappear as they drove away, leaving behind the only evidence that she had ever existed. Her ship would be studied and taken apart piece by piece. But what about her? What would they do to her? The facility they brought her to looked like a prison made of concrete and steel. Bright white lights hurt her eyes. The air smelled like chemicals and fear. They put her in a room with no windows, just a bed, a table, and cameras watching her every move. The walls were too smooth to climb, and even if she could climb, her body wouldn't let her. For the first time since leaving her home planet, Zara felt completely alone. Her lights dimmed to almost nothing as sadness filled her heart. She had come so far, hoping to find somewhere safe, somewhere she could belong. Instead, she found another world where being different made you a prisoner. The humans who came to see her every day treated her like a puzzle to solve, not a person with feelings. They took her blood, measured her bones, and wrote notes about her on their clipboards. They spoke about her like she wasn't even there. Subject shows signs of muscular dystrophy, one scientist noted. Bone density is significantly lower than human normal, but they never asked her name. They never asked if she was in pain. They never asked why she had come to their world in the first place. If they had, she might have told them about the war on her planet, about how people like her were being hurt just for being born different, about how she was one of the lucky few who escaped in time. Instead, she curled up in the corner of her cold room and tried to remember her family's faces. The blue lights under her skin barely glowed now, like stars going out one by one. She had traveled across the galaxy to find acceptance, but it seemed like fear and hatred were the same everywhere. Days turned into weeks. The only human who showed her any kindness was the doctor from that first night. But even she could only do so much. The people in charge had bigger plans for Zara. They wanted to know about her technology, her planet's defenses, her people's weaknesses. They couldn't understand that she was just a refugee looking for a home. Outside her prison, the world was talking about her. News reports called her everything from the creature to the alien threat. Pictures of her crash site were on every channel, but nobody knew the real story. Nobody knew that she was just scared, hurt, and desperately hoping someone would see her as more than just a monster from space. As Zara lay on her thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, she wondered if coming to Earth had been the biggest mistake of her life. Her home planet might have been dangerous for people like her, but at least there, some people understood what it was like to be different. Here, she was the only one of her kind, surrounded by beings who saw her as nothing more than a threat to be contained. The lights under her skin flickered weakly, like a dying candle in the wind. But somewhere deep in her heart, a tiny spark of hope still burned. Maybe, just maybe, there was one human out there who would see past her differences and recognize the person inside. Someone who understood what it felt like to be rejected just for being born different. She had no way of knowing that such a person was already fighting for her, preparing to change both of their lives forever. The news broke on a Tuesday morning, and within hours, everything changed. Someone inside the government facility had leaked photos of Zara to the media. Blurry images of her blue-tinted skin and long limbs spread across the internet like wildfire. By noon, every news channel was running the same shocking headline: "Real alien found on Earth." The world went crazy. Social media exploded with theories, fears, and arguments. Some people called her a gift from the stars. Others said she was the beginning of an invasion. Religious groups gathered in churches, praying and arguing about what her arrival meant. Scientists on TV talked about the possibilities, while politicians demanded answers that nobody had. But for Zara, trapped in her concrete prison, none of this mattered. She couldn't understand the human language on the television they'd put in her room, but she could see the angry faces of protesters outside the facility. Their signs had pictures of her crossed out in red. Their voices carried through the thick walls, chanting words that sounded harsh and unfriendly. Inside the facility, things got worse every day. More doctors came to study her. They took samples of her blood, her hair, even tiny pieces of her skin. They measured every part of her body and wrote down numbers on their charts. When she tried to communicate through drawings, showing them pictures of her damaged mobility device and pointing to her weak legs, they just took the drawings away as evidence. The worst part was how they talked about her, right in front of her, as if she couldn't understand emotions, even if she couldn't understand words. The subject shows signs of deterioration, one scientist said, looking at his clipboard instead of at her. Whatever genetic defect it has is getting worse without proper treatment. Zara's blue lights grew dimmer each day. Back home, her people knew that these lights were connected to both health and happiness. When someone was sick or sad, their lights would fade. But these humans didn't know that. They just saw her as a puzzle to solve, not a person who was slowly dying inside. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, a young professor sat in his wheelchair, watching the news coverage with growing anger. David Chen had been born with spina bifida, and he'd spent his whole life fighting against people who saw his disability first and his humanity second. Now, watching how they treated Zara, he felt that familiar fire burning in his chest. "This is wrong," he said to his empty apartment, his hands clenched into fists. On the screen, a government official was explaining why the alien had to be kept isolated for everyone's safety. But David saw through the words. He'd heard the same excuses, his whole life. Different was dangerous. Different needed to be locked away. Different couldn't be trusted to live freely. David taught linguistics at the local university, but his real passion was fighting for the rights of people with disabilities. He'd organized protests, written articles, and given speeches about treating everyone with dignity and respect. Looking at the grainy footage of Zara struggling to move around her cell, he saw himself. He saw every person who'd ever been judged for something they couldn't control. That night, David started making phone calls. He reached out to disability rights groups, human rights organizations, and civil liberties lawyers. Most of them thought he was crazy. "She's not even human," one lawyer said. "How can we fight for the rights of something from another planet?" But David wouldn't give up. "Look at her," he said, sending them the leaked photos. "Really look at her. She's disabled, just like millions of people on this planet. She can't walk properly. She needs help to move around. And instead of giving her medical care, they're treating her like a criminal." Slowly, people started to listen. A few disability advocates agreed to meet with David. Then a human rights lawyer offered to help. Word spread through online communities of people who understood what it felt like to be treated as less than human because of their differences. As protests grew outside the facility, two very different groups emerged. On one side were the people demanding that Zara be sent away or worse. They carried signs saying "Earth for humans" and "Send it back to space." Their faces were twisted with fear and anger, the same expressions David had seen directed at him countless times throughout his life. On the other side, a smaller but growing group of people held signs reading "Dignity for all" and "Different doesn't mean dangerous." Many of them used wheelchairs, walked with canes, or showed other visible signs of disability. They understood that the fight for Zara's rights was really a fight for everyone's rights to be treated with respect. Inside her cell, Zara didn't know about the people fighting for her. All she knew was that each day brought more tests, more needles, and more humans who looked at her with curiosity or fear, but never with kindness. Her mobility device remained broken, forcing her to drag herself around the small room. The simple act of reaching the bathroom became an exhausting challenge. The only bright spot in her dark world was the doctor who had first examined her at the crash site. Dr. Patricia Williams still came to check on her, and unlike the others, she treated Zara gently. She would help her sit up straighter and made sure she had soft pillows for her aching joints. Sometimes Dr. Williams would just sit quietly with her, and Zara could feel the difference between kindness and clinical curiosity, but even Dr. Williams was fighting a losing battle. The facility's director had made it clear that Zara was a research subject, not a patient. When Dr. Williams suggested modifications to make Zara's cell more accessible, she was told that comfort wasn't the priority. Information was what mattered, answers about alien technology and potential threats. As weeks passed, Zara's condition worsened. Without proper nutrition for her unique biology and without the movement aids she needed, Her already weak muscles grew weaker. The blue lights under her skin barely flickered now, like dying stars in a vast, empty sky. She spent most of her time lying on the thin mattress, staring at the white ceiling and remembering better days. The breaking point came when security cameras caught footage of Zara falling while trying to reach a cup of water. She lay on the floor for several minutes, struggling to get back up with her failing muscles before anyone came to help her. Someone leaked this footage to the media, and suddenly the whole world could see her vulnerability and pain. David organized the largest protest yet. Hundreds of people gathered outside the facility, many of them sharing their own stories of discrimination and mistreatment. News crews interviewed protesters who spoke passionately about dignity, respect, and the universal need for compassion. During the protest, something remarkable happened. As David spoke through a megaphone about the right to be treated as a person, regardless of origin or ability, Zara heard his voice through her cell window. She couldn't understand his words, but she could hear the passion and pain in his tone. For the first time since her crash, she felt like someone out there truly understood her struggle. Security guards eventually arrested David and several other protesters for trespassing, but as they led him away in handcuffs, he looked up at the small window of Zara's cell. For just a moment, their eyes met across the distance. In that brief connection, Zara saw something she hadn't seen since leaving her home planet. Recognition. Not curiosity, not fear, but the look of someone who truly understood what it meant to be seen as different and judged for it. That night, alone in her cell, Zara's lights pulsed just a little brighter. Maybe she wasn't completely alone after all. Getting arrested turned out to be the best thing that could have happened to David. The news cameras caught everything as police officers carefully lifted his wheelchair into the transport van. The image of a disabled professor being taken away for standing up for another being's rights spread across social media within hours. That night, from his jail cell, David could hear other inmates talking about the alien story. Most of them had opinions, but few had actually thought deeply about what was happening. "Man, if I was locked up like that thing, I'd go crazy," one prisoner said. David smiled sadly. He'd been locked up in different ways his whole life, just because his legs didn't work the way other people's did. When his lawyer bailed him out the next morning, reporters were waiting outside the jail. David had never been comfortable with attention, but he knew this was his chance to make people think differently. The first reporter shoved a microphone in his face and asked, "Professor Chen, why are you defending an alien creature?" David looked straight into the camera. "I'm not defending a creature," he said calmly. "I'm defending a person. Yes, she looks different from us. Yes, she comes from somewhere else. But watch that footage of her trying to get a drink of water. Watch her struggle to stand up. That's not a monster. That's someone who needs help, just like millions of people on this planet." The interview went viral. Within days, David was getting calls from news stations, podcasts, and talk shows. Each time, he told the same story in different ways. He talked about his own experiences with discrimination. He explained how society often feared what it didn't understand, and he always brought the conversation back to one simple question: what makes someone deserve dignity and respect? But David knew that good speeches wouldn't be enough. He needed legal action. Working with a team of civil rights lawyers, he filed a lawsuit challenging the conditions of Zara's detention. The case was unlike anything the courts had ever seen. How do you argue for the rights of someone who isn't technically human under the law? The lawyers found creative ways around this problem. They argued that any intelligent being capable of suffering deserved basic protections. They pointed to laws about animal cruelty and asked why an obviously intelligent alien would have fewer rights than a pet dog. Most importantly, they demanded that Zara be given proper medical care and accommodations for her disability. Meanwhile, inside the facility, Dr. Patricia Williams was fighting her own battle. She'd been watching Zara's condition get worse every day, and her medical training told her that something had to change soon, or they might lose her entirely. The blue lights under Zara's skin were barely visible now, and she spent most of her time lying motionless on her bed. Dr. Williams had tried to get approval for better equipment, physical therapy, and nutritional support that might help someone with Zara's obvious muscular condition. Each request was denied. The facility director made it clear that keeping the subject alive for study was important, but keeping her comfortable was not a priority. That's when Dr. Williams made a choice that would change everything. Late one night, she copied Zara's complete medical file onto a flash drive. The records showed clear evidence of a degenerative muscular condition similar to human muscular dystrophy. They also showed that Zara had been trying to communicate through mathematical equations and star charts drawn on scraps of paper. Dr. Williams contacted David's legal team and secretly provided them with the medical records. When the lawyers saw the evidence, they immediately understood what they were dealing with. The mathematical equations were incredibly complex, showing knowledge of physics and astronomy far beyond what most humans understood. The star charts appeared to show navigation routes between solar systems. "She's not just intelligent," one lawyer said, studying the papers. "She's probably smarter than most of the people keeping her locked up. And look at these drawings of mechanical devices. I think she's trying to show them how to fix whatever equipment she needs to walk properly." Armed with this new evidence, David's team called a press conference. They released carefully selected portions of Zara's medical records, with her mathematical work displayed on large screens behind them. The effect was immediate and powerful. Here was undeniable proof that the being in custody was not only intelligent, but was actively trying to communicate and ask for help. The public reaction was swift. Scientists from universities around the world looked at Zara's equations and confirmed that they showed advanced understanding of theoretical physics. Mathematicians were amazed by the elegance of her problem-solving methods. Even people who had been afraid of her before started to see her differently. But the real breakthrough came when David finally got legal permission to visit Zara as her appointed advocate. The facility fought hard against this, but the court ruled that every detainee had the right to representation, regardless of their origin. The first meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. David rolled his wheelchair through the sterile corridors of the facility, his heart pounding with nervous excitement. He'd been fighting for this moment for months, but now that it was here, he wondered if he was really ready. The guards led him to a small room with 2 chairs and a metal table. The walls were white and bare except for security cameras in every corner. David positioned his wheelchair at the table and waited. After a few minutes, the door opened and 2 guards carefully helped Zara into the room. David's first thought was how small she looked. The news photos hadn't captured her frailty. Her blue-tinted skin was pale, almost gray, and the famous lights beneath it were barely flickering. She moved with obvious pain, each step a struggle even with the guards supporting her. When they helped her into the chair across from him, she immediately slumped forward, exhausted from the short walk. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. David saw pain and loneliness in her large, dark eyes, but he also saw intelligence and curiosity. Zara studied his wheelchair, then looked at his face with what seemed like recognition. Maybe she understood that they were both dealing with bodies that didn't work the way other people expected. David pulled out a piece of paper and drew a simple mathematical equation. 2 plus 2 plus. He slid it across the table to Zara. She looked at it for a moment, then took the pencil he offered and wrote 4 next to his equation. Then she drew her own equation, something much more complex involving what looked like calculus and physics. David smiled and shook his head, pointing to himself, and making a confused face. Zara's eyes seemed to brighten slightly. She erased her complex equation and drew something simpler, a stick figure in a wheelchair next to a stick figure with long arms, both surrounded by a heart shape. It was crude and simple, but the message was clear. She saw him as someone like her, someone who was different, but still deserving of friendship and understanding. David felt tears forming in his eyes as he realized this was the first real communication she'd had with anyone since her arrival on Earth. He drew his own picture in response. 2 stick figures, one in a wheelchair and one with long arms, standing together in front of a house with the sun shining overhead. Home. Acceptance. Friendship. Hope. When Zara saw his drawing, something remarkable happened. For the first time in months, the blue lights under her skin pulsed a little brighter. She reached across the table and gently touched David's hand with one long, weak finger. In that moment, 2 lonely souls found each other across the vast differences between their species. The guards were getting restless, indicating that the visit time was almost over, but David and Zara had made a connection that would change both of their lives forever. As the guards helped her stand to leave, Zara managed to draw one more simple picture. A star with lines connecting it to other stars and an arrow pointing toward Earth. She was trying to tell him something about her journey, about why she had come here. David drew a question mark next to her picture, showing he wanted to understand more. Zara pointed to herself, then to him, then drew a sad face, followed by a happy face. The meaning was clear. She had been sad and alone, but meeting him made her feel hopeful again. As they led her away, David sat in the quiet room, looking at their drawings scattered across the table. Each simple picture represented a breakthrough in communication between 2 very different beings. But more than that, they represented the beginning of a friendship that would challenge everything both their worlds believed about what it meant to be worthy of love and acceptance. After that first meeting, David couldn't stop thinking about Zara's drawings. He went home and spread them out on his kitchen table, studying each simple line and symbol. There was so much pain in those pictures, but also hope. He realized that she had been trying to communicate with humans for months, but no one had bothered to really listen. The next week, David returned to the facility with a bag full of supplies. He'd brought colored pencils, graph paper, a basic tablet computer, and even some children's picture books. The guards looked at him suspiciously, but his legal papers gave him the right to bring educational materials. When they brought Zara into the room, she looked a little stronger than before. The blue lights under her skin were still dim, but David could see curiosity in her eyes when she spotted his bag of supplies. He started with something simple, pulling out a picture book about different animals on Earth. Zara studied each page carefully, pointing at various creatures with obvious fascination. When she saw a picture of a dolphin, she became very excited. She grabbed a pencil and drew her own version, but with longer fins and strange markings along its body. Then she pointed to herself and made swimming motions with her arms. David realized she was showing him animals from her own world. Over the next hour, she drew creatures that looked like floating jellyfish with multiple eyes, and bird-like beings with 4 wings instead of 2. Each drawing was accompanied by gestures and expressions that helped David understand a little more about where she came from. But the real breakthrough came when David pulled out the tablet computer. Zara's eyes went wide when the screen lit up. She reached out tentatively and touched the surface, amazed when icons moved under her finger. David opened a simple drawing app and showed her how to use it. Within minutes, Zara was creating complex diagrams on the screen. She drew what looked like a map of stars, with lines connecting different points. Then she drew 2 planets, one much larger than the other, with sad faces on both. She pointed to the larger planet, then to herself, then made a gesture like she was being pushed away. David understood. She was telling him about leaving her home planet. But why? He drew a question mark on the tablet. Zara thought for a moment, then created a new drawing. She showed stick figures with long limbs like hers, but many of them had X marks drawn over them. Then she drew the same figures hiding or running away. The meaning hit David like a punch to the stomach. On Zara's world, people with physical differences were being hurt or forced to leave. She wasn't just an alien visitor, she was a refugee, running for her life just like he'd suspected. Over the following weeks, their communication system grew more complex. David brought basic language learning software on the tablet, and Zara picked up English words with incredible speed. Her first complete sentence, typed slowly on the tablet with one finger, was, "Thank you for seeing me as person." David had to step outside the room for a moment when he read those words. He sat in the hallway, wiping tears from his eyes, thinking about how simple kindness could mean everything to someone who had been treated as less than human. As Zara's English improved, she began sharing more of her story. Her people were advanced in many ways, with technology that could help disabled individuals live full, independent lives. But their society had become obsessed with genetic perfection. Anyone born with physical differences was considered a flaw, to be corrected or removed. "My family hid me for many years," she typed on the tablet during one visit. "But government find out. They say I must be fixed or go away forever. Some friends help me escape in small ship. We try to find new home, among stars." David learned that Zara wasn't alone when she left her planet. There had been others like her, other refugees seeking sanctuary in space, but their ships had been separated during a storm of cosmic radiation. She didn't know if any of her friends had survived. The more David learned about Zara's world, the more amazed he became by her knowledge. She understood physics and mathematics at a level that surpassed most human scientists. She drew diagrams of technologies that could revolutionize life for disabled people on Earth, mobility devices that responded to thought, medical treatments that could strengthen weak muscles, communication systems that worked directly with the brain. "Why do you know so much about helping people like us?" David asked during one visit. Zara's response was simple but profound. "When world reject you for being different, you learn to create better world in your mind. I spend many years dreaming of place where everyone can live with dignity." There, friendship deepened as David shared his own experiences with discrimination. He told her about growing up in a world that saw his wheelchair before it saw him as a person. He described the daily challenges of living in a society designed for people who could walk, but he also shared the joy he'd found in fighting for change and helping others. With David's permission, Zara began drawing detailed plans for accessibility improvements that could be made to the facility. She showed how doorways could be wider, how ramps could be more efficiently designed, and how simple changes could make life easier for anyone with mobility challenges. Dr. Williams, who had become a quiet ally in their friendship, was amazed by Zara's medical knowledge. "She understands human anatomy better than some doctors I know," she told David privately. "The treatments she's suggesting for her own condition could help millions of people on Earth." As news of their growing communication spread, public opinion continued to shift. David started live streaming some of their conversations with Zara's permission. People around the world watched in fascination as the two friends shared drawings, solved math problems together, and slowly built a bridge between their species. The live streams showed something that news reports had missed: Zara's personality. She was funny, making silly faces when she made mistakes in English. She was curious, asking endless questions about human culture and customs. She was kind, always asking about David's day and showing concern when he seemed tired or sad. Most importantly, the world could see her intelligence and dignity. This wasn't a monster or a threat. This was a person with thoughts, feelings, and dreams. She told jokes through her drawings. She showed homesickness when describing her planet. She demonstrated compassion when learning about human suffering. 1. Day. Zara created a drawing that would become famous around the world. It showed Earth as a small blue marble surrounded by stars, with stick figures of all different shapes and sizes holding hands around its surface. At the bottom, she wrote, In her improving English, all different, all valuable, all belong. The drawing was shared millions of times on social media, becoming a symbol for acceptance and inclusion. Disability rights groups adopted it as their logo. Human rights organizations printed it on banners. Children in schools around the world colored their own versions. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came when Zara showed David her most personal drawing yet. It was a picture of two figures, one in a wheelchair, one with long limbs, sitting together under a tree. Above them, she had written, "First friend who choose to stay." David looked at the drawing and realized that their friendship had changed. Both of them. Zara had found someone who saw her as a person worth knowing, and David had found someone who understood what it felt like to be different in a world that often rejected difference. As their communication improved and their bond strengthened, both friends began to dream of a different future. Maybe Zara didn't have to stay locked up forever. Maybe their friendship could be the start of something bigger, a new understanding between their species, built on the foundation of recognizing that everyone, no matter how different, deserved love and acceptance. The facility director wasn't happy about the growing publicity around Zara's case. Pressure was mounting from human rights groups, disability advocates, and even some government officials to improve her living conditions. But David and Zara had planted a seed of change that was growing stronger every day. Their simple drawings had become a universal language of hope, proving that friendship and understanding could bridge any gap, even the vast space between worlds. 6 months after their first meeting, everything changed. The constant pressure from human rights groups, disability advocates, and public opinion finally forced the government to make a decision. Zara couldn't stay in a military facility forever, especially not when the whole world was watching. On a crisp autumn morning, David got the call he'd been hoping for. "They're moving her to Portland Medical Center," his lawyer said, barely containing his excitement. "Real doctors, proper medical equipment, and most importantly, she'll be treated as a patient, not a prisoner." When David arrived at the hospital, he found Zara in a bright room with windows that looked out onto a garden. For the first time since her crash, she could see trees and sky. The blue lights under her skin were brighter than he'd seen them in months. She was sitting up in a real hospital bed, surrounded by medical equipment that was actually designed to help her instead of study her. "David," she said in English, her pronunciation much clearer now. "Look, I can see birds." She pointed excitedly at sparrows playing in the tree outside her window. After months in a windowless cell, such simple pleasures meant everything. The medical team at Portland was amazed by Zara's condition and her knowledge. Dr. Williams had transferred with her and was working with specialists to understand her unique biology. But the real breakthrough came when Zara began sharing her people's medical technology. Working with human engineers, she designed new mobility assistance devices that combined her advanced knowledge with Earth materials. The prototype looked like a sleek exoskeleton that supported her weak muscles while allowing natural movement. When she tried it for the first time, tears of joy streamed down her face as she walked across the room without struggling. "I had given up hope of walking again," she told David, taking careful but confident steps around her hospital room. "My device from home was destroyed in crash. I thought I would crawl forever." But the real magic happened when Zara's new mobility device was tested by other patients at the hospital. A young man who had been paralyzed in an accident took his first steps in 2 years. An elderly woman with severe arthritis could suddenly move without pain. Children with muscular dystrophy ran and played like they'd never been able to before. News of these miraculous devices spread quickly. Zara found herself becoming famous not as an alien threat, but as a healer and inventor. Companies offered millions of dollars for the rights to produce her designs, but Zara had a different idea. "Money is not important," she told David during one of their daily visits. Helping people is important. This technology should be free for everyone who needs it. Working with David's legal team, Zara established the Universal Access Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to making advanced mobility and medical technologies available to anyone, regardless of their ability to pay. The foundation's motto, written in both English and Zara's native language, was simple: different bodies, equal dignity. As Zara's health improved and her work gained recognition, something unexpected happened. Her people, who had been silent since her crash, finally responded to Earth's attempts at communication. The message came through radio telescopes around the world, translated by computers into dozens of human languages. The message was not what anyone expected. Zara's people were surprised to learn she was alive, but they were disturbed by her integration with human society. They viewed her work with disabled humans as a sign that she had been corrupted by inferior beings. They demanded her immediate return for genetic correction of her disability. When David heard about the message, he found Zara sitting quietly in her hospital room, staring out at the garden. The blue lights under her skin were pulsing slowly, a sign that she was deep in thought. "They want me to come home," she said without looking away from the window. "They say they can fix me, make me normal like other people." David felt his heart sink. After everything they'd been through, was he going to lose his friend to her own people? "What do you want to do?" he asked carefully. Zara turned to look at him, and David was surprised to see determination in her eyes, not sadness. "I do not want to be fixed," she said firmly. "I want to be accepted. Here, I have found something I never had on my home world, people who see my disability as just one part of who I am, not something wrong that needs to be corrected." The decision to grant Zara asylum was made by the highest courts in the land. In a landmark ruling, the judge declared that home is not determined by where one is born, but by where one finds acceptance, dignity, and the freedom to be oneself. Zara became Earth's first extraterrestrial citizen, with all the rights and protections that came with it. The celebration at the hospital was unlike anything David had ever experienced. Patients, doctors, nurses, and visitors from around the world gathered in the main lobby. Zara, wearing her sleek mobility device and moving with grace and confidence, gave her first public speech as an Earth citizen. "When I crashed on your world," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the crowd, "I was broken in many ways. My ship was destroyed, my body was failing, and my spirit was nearly gone. But one human chose to see past my differences to my heart. David showed me that the greatest disability is not in our bodies, but in our inability to accept each other as we are." The crowd erupted in applause, but Zara wasn't finished. "I came to Earth as a refugee running from prejudice, but I have found something here that my own people could not give me. A chance to use my differences to help others. This is my home now, and these are my people." 5 years later, David and Zara stood together on the roof of the Interspecies Understanding Center, a revolutionary facility they had built together. The building itself was a marvel of accessible design, incorporating both human engineering and Zara's advanced technology. Every surface, every pathway, every room was designed to accommodate beings of all different abilities. The center had become a beacon of hope for disabled individuals across the galaxy. 3 other alien refugee species had found sanctuary on Earth, each bringing their own unique perspectives on accessibility and inclusion. The building buzzed with activity as humans and aliens worked side by side, developing new technologies and sharing knowledge. "Can you believe how far we've come?" David asked, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. He was using an advanced wheelchair of Zara's design, one that responded to his thoughts and could navigate any terrain. Zara, now wearing a mobility suit that looked more like elegant armor than medical equipment, smiled as her blue lights pulsed with contentment. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if you had not chosen to fight for me, she said. If you had seen me as just another alien threat instead of a person who needed help. But you weren't just any person, David replied. You were someone like me, someone who understood what it felt like to be judged for being different. I think we were meant to find each other. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, both friends reflected on their incredible journey. Zara had come to Earth broken and alone, rejected by her own people and feared by humans. But through the power of one person's choice to see beyond differences, she had found not just acceptance, but a purpose greater than she had ever imagined. David had spent his life fighting for the rights of disabled people, often feeling like he was pushing against an unmovable wall. But meeting Zara had shown him that change was possible, that hearts and minds could be opened with patience, understanding, and love. Together they had proved that friendship knows no boundaries, not of species, not of ability, not of origin. They had shown two worlds that differences should be celebrated, not feared. And most importantly, they had created a place where anyone, no matter how different, could find acceptance and belonging. The Interspecies Understanding Center had received visitors from dozens of worlds, each bringing their own perspectives on disability, inclusion, and acceptance. What had started as one human's choice to befriend one alien had grown into a movement that was changing the galaxy's understanding of what it meant to belong. As they headed inside for the evening, Zara paused to look back at the stars. Somewhere, up there was her birth planet, where people like her were still being rejected and forced to hide. But down here on Earth, she had found something even more valuable than the home she had lost. She had found a family that chose to love her exactly as she was. "Thank you," she said to David as she did every evening, "for choosing to see me as worth saving." "Thank you," David replied as he always did, "for showing me that friendship can change the world." Together, they entered the center that stood as a monument to their friendship and a promise that no one, no matter how different, would ever have to face rejection alone again.